Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Inside the Margin. I'm Ko Bragg, and I'm the managing editor of The Margin. We are a nonprofit investigative outlet that does data-driven, deeply human journalism that centers the experiences of frontline communities. And Inside the Margin is our way of opening up our reporting process, letting you in behind the scenes, and inviting you into a conversation with the journalists and advocates whose work shapes the stories that we bring to you. Tonight's conversation focuses on our feature titled Breathing After BioLab, which Teresa, whom I'll introduce in a moment, reported and chronicled the implications and challenges that she and her community were facing a year after a fire erupted at the BioLab chemical plant in Conyers, Georgia, releasing toxic chemical plumes into the air and into the neighborhoods in Rockdale County and the surrounding areas. So tonight, to bring that conversation to light and talk about what's happened in the year and a half since, I'm joined by some incredible guests. Teresa Ervin-Springs, who wrote the feature, is our first person feature written by someone who's directly impacted by the environmental harms that we uncover in our work. And so she will always be special to The Margin for that reason, because she was able to take her lived experience and put it on the page for us. Outside of her writing, she is a minister, she's an author, and the founder and president of Hope City Center, a prominent 501c3 organization that advocates and provides for essential services for those affected by the criminal justice system. And she's also the co-owner of TKO Farming and the founder of Ancestral Beacon, an organization that supports agricultural endeavors through advanced knowledge. So that's Teresa. We're also joined by Walter Bannister, who's a longtime Conyers resident and the founder of Citizens of Rockdale. Teresa interviewed Walter for this story, and his experiences also ground the piece, and we'll hear more about those experiences, being a longtime resident and experiencing, this BioLab fire and the ensuing harm didn't happen in a vacuum. This is an ongoing issue that we brought to light. And then last but not least, we have Mindy Bish, who is the managing partner of Keenan Law Firm and the senior partner of Bish Law Firm, where she has built a career advocating for individuals, families, and communities harmed by corporate wrongdoing. Her practice is driven by a belief that corporations must be held accountable when their actions or failures to act cause harm to the people and the environment. A quick housekeeping note: if you're on Riverside, use the Q&A function in the chat sidebar to submit any questions that you have, and we'll get to as many as possible. And then if you're on YouTube, you can drop your questions in the comments and our team will bring them in. And so with that, let's dive in. Teresa, I want to go to you first. The story that you wrote for us opens with a scene from September 29th, 2024. It was a church Sunday, as you wrote, and you were driven to go to church because it was what you do, but also your family was attending with you. And so you took a Tylenol and you were like, I have to get rid of this headache. But after the service, on the long drive back home, you and your daughter received an alert on your phone around 11:30 a.m. about a fire that happened nearby. And so you thought the fire was back in your town of Covington, but really it was in Conyers where you took the exit through. And so little did you know that this was where these toxic flames had ignited at the BioLab plant. And you, as you wrote, you literally drove through a danger zone. So if you can take us back to that morning, how you felt getting that alert compared to what you later learned, and we can talk about sort of how that those next days unfolded. But take us back to that Sunday.
Okay, thank you, Ko. I want to express my gratitude for you and The Margin believing that this story needs to be told. I'm an advocate for people telling their own story, and fortunately, I cannot tell my story without telling my community story. So I woke up with a headache, and it was unusual for me because I don't get headaches. And like you said, I pushed through anyway. And on the way back, my daughter received an alert that there was a fire, but it was a Covington neighborhood alert. So we stopped in Covington on the exit where BioLab is, and we pulled off to the side. And we called the police department, and they told us it actually had happened in Covington. In Conyers. I got a little fragile because I had my daughter and my grandson with me. But the police officer told us that there was no problem, there was no danger in Covington, there was no problem. So I took my daughter home. She lived about a few miles from me in Covington, and I continued to, watch the news, watch the alerts. And they kept ensuring us that there was no problem. And so my roommate had just moved in and her granddaughter was here. Hurricane Helen just went by, and so the winds were high, and so she was outside. Both of us were outside, just thinking that there's no problem for us. But then a couple of days later, I think the next day maybe, I began to just excuse me, just begin to just feel awful. My stomach was aching, and I'm a person that don't get sick. I very rarely get sick. And so these headaches, my eyes burning, my chest just tightening by the hour, it was very frightening. And yeah, it's very frightening.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you outline very well is that there is like these multitude of things happening at one time where you're like, you're going outside because you're being reassured that it's like it's okay. Outside is not helpful necessarily, or like you don't know at this point, like you mentioned, Hurricane Helene had gone through, so like it moved the plume through very quickly and spread it out. And then there's also like, but inside isn't necessarily fully safe either, because as you chronicle, you had like a well-timed retreat away. You came back and there was like all of these things that were very out of sorts. There's dead bugs on the windowsill, your garden is wilted, and then there's a residue throughout your house. And so like the way what you described so well is that there's really nowhere to turn, and it's scary and it's confusing, and you're getting contradicting and information from public officials. So take us through sort of like your journey seeking help to kind of address these symptoms. Like you mentioned that like your eyes were burning, your chest felt constricted, your stomach hurt, like all of these things that are not normal and that were onset within hours of and days of this fire.
So that second day, that night I told my roommate if I did not feel better, I would go to the doctor. But when I woke up, I was not just frightened, I was angry. I was very angry that this was happening, and they didn't seem to be any help anywhere. And so I actually called the governor's office. All the good that did me, because they told me to call the EPA, and then the EPA didn't answer. So I went to my doctor and loaded up on, and still didn't understand everything, loaded up on medication. I couldn't afford to leave, but I had with Kairos International Prison Ministry. And so we had a weekend sharing the hope of Christ in prison. And so I thought to myself, well, even if I'm very little help to them, at least I can get away and get some relief, because it just didn't seem that I was getting any relief from even the medication. But I got a little relief when I left. But when I came back, right away, I opened a can of soup. I was exhausted. I sat on the sofa. I got my mama's blanket. I put it over me. I just started itching, and I didn't understand. And then so that night I went to bed and I just itched all night. I just scratched all night. And I woke up and it just dawned on me, oh my God, this residue is in my house. What's frightening is that no one tells you the do's and don'ts, what not to do, how to handle things. I ended up making bad matters worse because I actually probably need hazmat to clean my house. But I cleaned it from top to bottom. I wiped the walls down, but I noticed flies in these windowsill. So the advocate in me, since I'm always advocating for everyone else, and I actually learned this from my roommate, this thought, how do you know? So I was thinking, well, how would anybody know that I was affected? So I started collecting evidence for myself, and just continued to get worse. Every few weeks I went to the doctor, and I just kept getting sick. I would feel better a few days and then would come back on, and it was just a loop. And my doctor said something to me. I said, "Doctor, every time I go out, I get sick." And she said, "Well, you need to stop going out." And I took that message to mean get out of the area.
I want to come back
And
to that
so
because
I
I
moved.
know Walter made similar decisions for his family and what to do in that immediate aftermath around stay, go, indoors, outdoors. One of the things that the strength of this story is, Teresa, you talked to so many community members about what you just detailed for us, like what those immediate first days were like. And one of the people that you interviewed is with us tonight, Walter Bannister. And in the story, Walter, you described the aftermath as eerie. So for those who are not necessarily familiar with this explosion, with this fire, the BioLab stores pool chemicals, and those pool chemicals, when they come in contact with water, the way that they're stored creates like an explosion hazard. And so there was like a leak in the facility. It was super rainy in the days prior to the actual fire. And despite this around the clock fire monitoring system that they had and people there and the on site at BioLab to say, like, when things are going wrong, these huge super sacks of these chemicals, these chlorine based chemicals, caught fire early in the morning in September 2024. And so this fire, like, the facility burned and the toxic plume moved through the Conyers area, which is not far outside of Atlanta. So Walter, this aftermath that you described in the piece was eerie. Birds are gone, insects are gone. You said your truck corroded, your garden died overnight. And you're someone that has a little bit of disaster experience. And so can you talk about like how what you witnessed in Conyers compared? I mean, you were talking about your skin burning, feeling like it was burning every time you went outside, like someone was putting a butane torch to your face, like you could feel the heat coming from it. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in the aftermath of this fire?
Thank you and the margin for actually facilitating this podcast. It's something that needs to be repeated and repeated and repeated so everybody will know exactly what's going on and what happened. Because things like this, as we say in the project management field, it shouldn't be killed. It should be resurrected and resurrected every single day. With my particular background, I am a retired Army operations officer. And one of my last assignments with the Army, I was what they call a DCE. When there's a federal disaster, that's a defense coordinator element. We go in and we take over all the emergency support functions, which they call ESFs, from mass care and things of that nature. And we staff the whole entire disaster, as you say. So once BioLab actually ignited back in September of 24, my DCE had actually kicked in. And as you see the plume of smoke that's on, there's so many things that was done wrong with the local administration, to include the state administration, and I would have to say also the federal administration with this particular disaster. Because if you look at the plume of smoke, they actually outline a cordon of 3 miles, and you look at the magnitude of the smoke, how much smoke was actually generated, the toxicity from the smoke. That particular disaster area, just from my experience and the training that I received from FEMA, it shouldn't have been 2 miles. It should have been a disaster area, ground zero, a biolab, and a circle 20 miles outside of that, which should have been the evacuation area. Because when you look at the wind direction of that particular smoke, that chemical smoke, it was blowing northeasterly towards Walnut Grove, where I live. I live about 3.1 miles outside their disaster area, which they set a cordon area of 3 miles, which is unheard of. And that particular smoke, when it came down, if you're familiar with the movie The Fog, the 1980 movie The Fog, you could literally see that large plume of smoke just coming down, engulfing every single house, every single tree in the area. And it's like, okay, it's coming. And it, like the lady said, stay out of the fog. That was the realization of this particular incident. And when it came in with a vengeance. It destroyed, I'm talking mature trees at probably 35 to 40 years old. I mean, those, and at that peak of the time here in Georgia, we still have leaves on the tree. Within 24 hours, those trees were dissipated. They were gone. No leaves on the tree, nothing. About, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks later, a tree that old, you could actually just push it, and it's like it had been sitting there rotting for approximately a year or two. And that's how fast the chemicals that came in and ate things up. Also, as you mentioned, I live close to the International Horse Stadium, a horse park. So there's a lot of nature, wildlife, and things of that nature that's here. You would see a fly, a mosquito, some sort of insects, but there was nothing. There was no birds. There was no deer. There was no turkeys. I mean, there was nothing. It's almost as if the crystallized magnetism from these animals, say for instance like the whales or any type of marine life, when a hurricane comes in, they already know that the hurricane is coming in, so they evacuate it. So there was no insects, no bugs, no nothing. I mean, it was like the day that the earth stood still. Absolutely nothing going on. So what I had to do is I had a choice to make. So I told my family, you all have to go. You have to go down to Florida. But the bad part of that, they went to Florida, and at the same time frame, Hurricane Helene was there. So my daughter-in-law, grandkids, although they stayed and rode the hurricane out, they were ordered to evacuate from Florida. So they came back here to Conyers, but then went back to Florida. They say, at least we know the hurricane is only going to be here for a day, but we don't know exactly what's going on with the air quality. So I mean, there was a lot of confusion, as Teresa had basically stated earlier, regarding the information that was being passed on to residents here of Rockdale County. So what we did, and I'm saying we, it was collectively as a community, we formed a group, and in that particular group, we was managed to get as many people on a Zoom call to inform them of what's actually currently going on with BioLab. And you mentioned chemicals, Co. I had a meeting with the senior, I think it's the senior chemical analyst at Georgia Tech, and she was telling us that there were so many chemicals that there was reading from this BioLab disaster that there were cancer producing agents. So this chemical detection device is not at ground zero. It's 25 miles away in South DeKalb. So can you imagine the chemicals that was being emitted at ground zero versus 25 miles away, which the EPA, EPD, and everybody downplayed this down to nothing. So there was a big failure with everyone. So my position is I put on my DCE hat and went and talked with various state officials and things of that nature. But from my experience, I mean, when you go outside, as soon as you go outside, I mean, your face is just burning as if somebody hit your face with a butane lighter. Your nose is burning. Your eyes is watering. If anybody's on this call has been in the military, and when they go through the gas chamber, I mean, your nose, eyes running, it's like you're going through the gas chamber. And I mean, and you can't get away from it. And when you go inside the house, you cut off your ventilation system. Your house is not air sealed. I mean, we didn't have reaction time where we could put plastic around our windows to seal off any air or anything coming in or going out. It just wasn't that way. But with BioLab, they're not a first time offender. They're not a second time offender. They're not a third time offender. They're not a fourth. They're a fifth time offender. So with that said, I mean, it was troubling for me coming from that particular background. The way that seeing this thing was actually handled, it should have been done a little better at all levels, at the federal level, at the state level, to include the local level. There's a lot of fault, a lot of finger pointing that's going on. And I'm glad we got people like Mindy on this call to hold these people accountable, which what we're doing is pushing to hold them accountable. So stuff like this just not happen here in Rockdale County, but anywhere throughout the continental U.S.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those details. It's like even having edited the story and working on it with Teresa, it's just certain things just never should be normalized, which is that people are going outside and trying to figure out for themselves, right? Like if it's safe to be at home. I want to talk to you, Teresa, about some of the details you have in the story. I know we open with you going to church with your daughter Nicole, and then later you detail the fact that like your daughter has asthma, and that like this you having developed some like difficulties breathing yourself gave you like a level of empathy for her and like what she's gone through, and then also the way that life continued, and like she's going to work and she works retail and the clothes are covered in this like weird residue, and like the smell is everywhere, this like chlorine is just everywhere. And so can you share a little bit about sort of like this return to normalcy in some ways while you're also trying to figure out your health issues? You've decided I need to move away, my doctor's telling me I can't go outside. Like how did you balance that reality?
Okay, but I want to correct you. There was no return to normalcy, and I think most of our lives. Um, my daughter worked at a retail 1 mile from BioLab, and she has asthma, and it's very serious. It's not a small case. It's very serious. She has very bad lung issues, and every time she went in, she would have an attack and have to go to her doctor or the hospital. Um, and they ended up telling her if she didn't come to work, she would get fired. Um, but, it was that or her health, her life. Um, there was no return to normalcy, but because the loop kept happening for me, like I go through these spells and Mindy became my lawyer. I'll tell you about that later, but she was the one that told me about my illness. Even my doctor didn't tell me. When I went to the pulmonologist, they didn't tell me what to look out for, how to handle myself, what changes of life that I had to succumb to. And they diagnosed me with one diagnosis, but having lung issues now, and my daughter suffering from it for years. I just had no idea how this changed your life, how you have to live with just what's the air quality outside? Can I be outside today? Be around bleach anymore? I'm old school. My mother, we bleached the whole house, to get it clean. But even perfumes, and I'm a farmer, and so just smelling my marigolds can send me into a spasm. But there's no going back to normal, because there's all, and still today there's a cycle. I just got over the pneumonia in March. Well, no, the medicine they gave me didn't work. April, I was still going through it. So May, I was fine, but now so it's re-upping again. There's really, for me, there's no going back to normal. Worked a 70-acre farm, and my hair and my arms and my legs are full of pollen. So it wasn't an issue for me. But now I just have these breathing problems that I have to live with unless the Lord heals me for the rest of my life.
And I appreciate that correction, truly, because I think what you're articulating here is that, despite a lack of answers, full accountability, like you are expected to just continue this different sphere of your life. And I want to talk a little bit about Mindy, sort of how you met Teresa, and we can talk a little bit about your work, in part because I think Teresa teased it up perfectly in the piece where she wrote, "There's a disaster waiting to happen in every community on the margins, from the toxic train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio." And you've done some critical work there that I want to talk about. And then she lists some other chemical disasters. But tell us about your work, Mindy, and how it led you to Georgia and Teresa.
In November of 2024, I was invited to go to East Palestine and talk to some of the people who had opted in and opted out of the class action. And prior to that, I had tried cases with individual plaintiffs. I was successful. I've been doing this for 33 years, but I'd never been around class actions or mass torts or anything like that before. And so what happened is that I sat in the room. I was not like the main lawyer that was there, but I sat in the back of the room and I just listened to all these people talk. And I thought to myself, how did this happen? How are there people dying who got checks for $5,000? How did all this happen? And that began the journey of looking at class action lawsuits and realizing that they just simply don't work. The only people they work for is the wrongdoer who gets off without having to take full accountability, and the plaintiff class action lawyers who make a huge fee. For everyone else, they get nothing. Everything stays just as it was, and they get a pittance of a check. That's what they get. And then everybody walks away, and we just wait for it to happen again. And I was of the mind that this just can't happen. So after we went to East Palestine, and I took those cases on, and I've been fighting for those people ever since. The next place that we came to, because the Keenan Law Firm is a law firm that has been part of Atlanta for a very long time, is we went to Conyers. The person that does testing for us had been here virtually on the first couple of days. What we have learned is and I want to dissuade all. If you're looking at the government and thinking that they're going to fix this, they're not. They're not. They're part of the problem. State, local, federal, they're not. We have example after example. It doesn't matter who the president is. It doesn't matter who the governor is. It doesn't matter what party they belong to. This is almost baked in the bureaucracy that currently exists. And the truth is, if you look at the history, nothing changes without a jury verdict. The only thing these people care about is money, and the only way you're going to get any change is money. And so what we as a law firm have been doing is we have been going across the country. So we are in Conyers, we're in Louisiana, we're in East Palestine, and the list goes on. And I go around the country warning people about class actions and saying to them, these attorneys file within 2 days. What did they know? What information do they have? How are they intending to proceed? They just want to be the first to the courthouse. Why? And the truth is, you have all been chemically exposed. Your injuries take several years before. Some are immediate, like Teresa, and I have other clients that have had lost babies, lost their voice, with lung issues and lung cancer and heart and things like that. And I have there will be some that will get sick over the next 2 or 3 years. And so what I do is I go in and I say to people, take a deep breath. Let's see, because some of you will get cancer, some of you won't. Some of you will get really sick, some of you won't. But I can't look at you and say, it'll be you'll be fine, but you'll be sick. We want that time to be able to see how things develop. BioLabs was completely preventable for years and years and years, and no one has done a thing. And they'll continue to do it. And so we are going to build the correct case. As soon as the class action attorneys finish with their nonsense and we can opt out all our people, we are going to build the correct case with all the correct facts. And we're not filing till all our ducks are in a line and all of our experts are hired and we're ready. And the people that we represent know that. And so what we offer is an alternative. And I tell people, you don't have to use our office. Just hire an attorney that commits to you not to put you in a class action. Find an attorney whose first question to you is, how do you feel? Were you sick? There's a report that came out. I don't know if you guys have seen it yet. It came out just recently, and it's in the environmental science and technology. It is from Georgia Tech. They had sensors in Conyers and in Midtown Atlanta. And what people need to know is the toxic levels they were measuring in Midtown Atlanta. This is not a Conyers problem. This is an everybody problem. And it's chlorine, it's bromide, it's all kinds of cancer causing. It is the incomplete combustion of the plastic bags that held all those chemicals. And if you remember World War I, what were the bombs? What did we use? What was used? Chlorine gas. And it's been banned for warfare since World War I. And all you have to do is Google, what's the difference between the chlorine gas that was put in that plume and the chlorine gas that was used in World War I? And you know what the answer is? Nothing. They had an additive to kill you faster at war, but
Thank you
nothing.
so much for all of that context. I think what you're mentioning around symptoms that are onset later, for example, and the importance of time and understanding a fuller scope of what people are encountering and how systems have failed. I know one of the things that's in progress now and before the Georgia Supreme Court is to weigh in on the legal grounds of a medical monitoring fund that's stemming from a class action suit and whether or not BioLab could be liable for compensating those exposed to the chemical plume, even if they haven't shown physical symptoms yet. And so I just was curious about sort of your impression of the sort of like legal landscape that's been moving forward. There was like a multitude of lawsuits immediately after the BioLab fire. And sort of, if I can tack on a little bit more to that question, is this the best avenue? Are the courts and seeking legal representation the best way to fight back in the absence of real like remediation through the county or the state or federal government?
The answer to that question is lawsuits are the only thing that corporations like this hear. It's the only thing that will cause a change. When we started this fight, we also started a nonprofit. And one of the things I tasked people with was the idea I can put my life on a cell phone. How come I can't go clean up the dirt? Why are we still cleaning up dirt in the same way that we cleaned it up in the 1970s and the 1950s? By dilution. We'll dilute the dirt. We have a pilot project working right now in East Palestine. We think we found an answer. It's going to be expensive, and the scientists are working on that. But what has to happen is you got to go to the courts. You got to show them they're going to pay for it, so that people can stay in their paradises and we can figure out a way to clean it up. Look, they've had class actions against biolabs. This is not the first lawsuit against them, and they're still doing it.
Yeah, I want to ask you from the context of like your work in East Palestine in particular, because there was, I remember the news from the fire when it happened, the massive train derailment, burned for days, and there was all of these questions about when this community could return, what was going to be in the air, and ultimately this, in like the EPA has since issued like an all clear, right? And there's been a $600 million settlement that has sort of been touted as like, okay, great, like we did it, right? I've seen like news articles about just sort of the rollout of that, and that as imperfect as that settlement may be, that it has kind of been heralded as of late as like a blueprint for other communities that have experienced similar toxic disasters. There are people who are sick, who have died, and a judge allowed residents to intervene in the federal lawsuits that settled and provided compensation and medical monitoring. You know, that's something that obviously Georgia is considering, or it's before the state Supreme Court. And one of the things that you were quoted saying recently was that like once the evidence fully comes out, it'll reveal the failures of the EPA and the US government in overseeing some of this testing, and everyone is going to be proven wrong. I just would love to hear a little bit more about that, because I think we see big numbers like $600 million, and we're like, okay, people were heard, and people were given some sort of compensation for a harm. But years later, you are still fighting. So what's, and I think it's important context because the biolab much later. Yeah.
$600 million, $168 million to the attorneys for attorney fees and costs. $125 million to be split up among everybody who claimed they had an injury. People who died of cancer got a check for $1,800. There was no reasonable compensation there. None at all. Zero. They were told by an alleged expert that there was zero chance that one of them would get cancer. They were lied to. It is not a blueprint. The attorneys that represented Norfolk Southern in getting that settlement, the defense attorneys, got an award for how they settled that case. Let me tell you, as a plaintiff attorney, if I settle a case and the other side gets an award, I'm retiring that day because I did not do my job. It is not a blueprint, it's a warning to everyone who can hear it that this is a warning. Norfolk Southern made a profit the year the $600 million was paid. They make $600 million in a few months. Did not hurt them, not at all. Devastated everyone around. 2 confirmed cases of male breast cancer within 5 miles of one another, and potentially a third. Anyone who thinks this was a lot of money and a blueprint, let me dissuade you of that notion. What we are doing is we intend to prove that all of the testing that was done was monkeyed with and is false. We can show that they took dirt samples and put them in plastic bags. The problem with that is the plastic bag will absorb the toxins. So when you take the dirt from the plastic bag and then you put it in the glass jar and then you send it to the lab, you've degraded your sample and you're going to get bad numbers. They put plastic bags over their air monitoring. And there's a question as to whether their air monitors could actually monitor for what they were supposed to be looking for. They had done no soil testing when they told the residents it was safe to come home. 0. How did they know it was safe if you hadn't done any soil testing? They brought everybody home. Mothers, grandmothers, children, aunts, and uncles on 0 soil testing. None. We have testing over time. We can show that East Palestine and the surrounding areas are as contaminated now as they were on the day of the derailment. We can show sampling slips that don't have signatures from the person who allegedly took the sample, so there is no chain of custody on any of them. And we intend to attack that testing to show that it lacks foundation and it should not be trusted, and that in the federal lawsuit, the assumption should not be that it is all cleaned up, but in fact, it's never started. And that's what we intend to do on behalf of the people who live there every single day and walk out their doors to contamination every single day, and have since February of 2023. And the thing of it is, and I know you get me talking, I could talk forever, so I apologize. But the thing to understand is this contamination that all of you have been exposed to, it's generational. It's not just you. So it's not just a child or a young person, it's their children. So people, they need to be warned about these ramifications and really demand, not only for themselves, but their children and their children's children.
Yeah, thank you for the details and the framing that you're offering, that this is a warning and not a blueprint. I know we are starting to get some questions in. I want to share a couple of those, but before that, I would love to go back to Teresa just to kind of hear, like, when you hear Mindy speak that way, like, what comes up for you and, like, what are you thinking about just, in this moment?
I felt like I was in a foreign country and I had nothing, no reference, no help, no thought about what I should do. And so I came across a video with the state legislator in the Senate, and Walter Banner was there. So I reached out to him, and we've been communicating back and forth. And when I started writing the article, Mindy and Scott Smith was having a meeting, Mindy's organization, the Keening firm. If Cole can remember, I was kind of skeptical of going. I had saw some information about Scott, and so I, knew he was an expert. But I was kind of iffy about a law firm holding a meeting. But Mindy scared the bejeebus out of me. She really did. She was very honest about what was going on in East Palestine. And I was thankful. I was thankful for the both of them. I was thankful for other people that I had met. They were community activists as well. I also interviewed Mindy and got a lot of information. She didn't end up in the article, but she was a lifesaver for me. I wasn't a part of the class action, but I was with another law firm, and I did not think that they were sufficient or they were adequate in the way that they were treating or handling my case with my daughter's case as well. So going to that meeting in August of 2025 really opened my eyes about, so Scott Smith has this phrase, you can't find what you don't look for. And it came to my mind pretty soon that if they're copying or if they're saying, BioLab is saying that it is chlorine. That's what they're saying. That's what they're admitting to. Well, my mind I'm always suspicious. So I was thinking, well, what are they not admitting to? What else is in there? And so Scott, with his presentation, he not only told us what was in the biolab, the chemicals, some of the harm that it would do to us, and also the areas that were affected, that it was wider. Mr. Walter used a word that they wanted to be vindicated. The people want to be vindicated, meaning, you have this small circle of people that you say, or a small area you say that was affected, but really, people are 25 miles out are being affected. So I was grateful to meet both of them and all the people that I've met that I still talk to who didn't make the article. It's just a whirlwind. It's continued, but there are many people much worse off than me. So them sharing their story is really important to me. And the community coming together was very important to me because I had no community here. I was only here for less than a year. I want to say the experience I had, I'm from Florida. I was in Florida for 54 years. So I have a lot of experience with hurricane, not much with tornadoes, but you have time to get ready. But this, it just hit my life like a bomb. I just want to scream from the mountaintops, like people wake up, because all this, these things are in your backyard, whether it's a biolab, whether it's a data center, whether it's going to be a nuclear bomb, whether it's going to be Iran doing something, it's something. And we need to prepare ourselves as a community. Why I joined this call is because, my call to action would be have conversations with your neighbors, with your families, of, what your plan would be. This taught me a lot. And I took workshops with the disaster relief. I've taken CPR classes. I've gotten my new community involved. I think the most awful thing when I was in it, when it was happening, I didn't know where help was, you know. And so I think people should know where help is. Call your disaster relief organizations, take CPR classes, call Red Cross and the Salvation Army and United Way and see what they could offer if anything had happened, because no one came. No one came. No one bought water. No one told me not to clean my house. No one came. No one. And it wasn't until I reached out to my community and met Walter and others like him that I found help.
Thanks for sharing not only what you share, but how you share things. I feel like the strength of the piece and just you is just the way that you are able to really cut to the heart of what you're experiencing, and also what the people in your community and the people you found community with are experiencing. And I will always be upset that you had to live this and so that you were able to write this story. But I'm really grateful that you did report and write this story, and that you are still in a fight of not of your own making, but just to recognize you for a moment, Teresa, because I know it's not been an easy day in a month, in a year, in the last couple. I want to uplift something from the chat before we head to close out our evening. I know I could listen to Teresa talk forever, so maybe we'll just have to do another one of these. There's a question in the chat around, and I know, Mindy, you spoke a little bit to this, of whether this fire could have been prevented, and if BioLab has already dealt with fines and lawsuits before, why are they still unregulated, even if the chemical sensors were in place?
That is really the crux of the matter, isn't it? But it is true that there were orders that they were supposed to be regulated. They were supposed to be watched. They were supposed to have a plan. And the people that I've been talking to that are in the know said that plan was not enforced on a local county level, on a state level, or on a federal level. And also know that there's some information about whether those chemicals were actually stored in a place where there were sensors.
Yeah, I think those questions definitely cut right to exactly what we wanted to know journalistically, and I'm sure what you want to know, Mindy, and are seeking answers to legally. And so I want to just go briefly around one more time for anyone to just offer sort of closing remarks on how this conversation landed. Like, how are we feeling? And most importantly, like, what does accountability actually look like to you as you continue to move forward in your lives? What would it mean to be made whole, if that's even on the table?
Really quick, I'm going to make this brief, and I'm going to piggyback off of what Mindy has actually said. On a federal and state and a local level, some of the things that actually should have happened with the emergency management agency at the local level. What we used to do is we used to go through, and wherever there's any toxic chemicals in a specific area. For instance, Delaware, they have a nuclear facility. Here in Conyers, they had a reactive to include a non-reactive chemical. So there should have been some type of exercises done at the local level with the emergency management team here at the local level. So those are the first responders, the medical team, the mass care, and all that other things. So things that Teresa's talking about. So in the event that there's a biolab, that a chemical explosion happened, then the community would actually know how to happen, to include a communication system where not just a mass text message go out and say there's a biolab fire. There should be something in there regarding where the evacuation area is, where the routes are, where the safe havens are. Those are things that were actually established approximately 3 to 4 days after, which is it doesn't pass the common sense. So when they're talking about the chemicals, there was a reactive chemical, which is the chlorine, which is reactive to the water, but no one is actually speaking about the non-reactive chemicals. Then the non-reactive chemical is actually worse than the reactive chemicals, because those things stay in the soil. That's what Mindy was talking about for 30 to 40 years. You're going around kicking things, you're building a new building, and there's things that happen to you that you don't even know where it's actually coming from. So these are the untold stories that actually is going on right now. So what we did as a community is there's figures been thrown around, and we came up with when we spoke with the local legislation, we said what we wanted to see as Rockdale County is $1.4 billion, but that went from $1.4 billion to $2.8 billion. And we broke that down. We broke it down to X amount of dollars going to Rockdale County for 20 years, $800 million for various things within in Rockdale County. Mindy mentioned a medical trust fund. We've been talking medical trust fund ever since this thing actually happened. So we're talking at least $1.4 billion in medical just for those people who, the unborn child, the child that's born, the elderly, all of these people here. So we looked at these particular numbers, and the only way that we are become as a community, not just Rockdale County, but our neighbors as well, become vindicated if these particular numbers are actually granted to the county, because some people are, okay, well, my truck was damaged or my business was damaged, but okay, what about the community? What about the housing market? The housing market was damaged too as well. The values of the houses within this community, they plummeted. You can look at the numbers. The numbers as far as with the housing market here in Rockdale County, they went down instead of spiking up. So with all of these numbers that we actually presented, we feel as if we have people like Mindy pushing for us, then Rockdale County can be fully vindicated. But we still, a life is a life. Money does not save a life, but still yet it will give us something to build off of. And I yield, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Teresa, final remarks?
Yes, I want to say that there's a phrase that no one is coming to save us, which is not true. That's Jesus Christ. But until he returns, we're to work in community. And right now, we're the only ones we have. We're the only ones we have. And if you don't talk the way the system is, you don't talk to your neighbor. You don't talk to the person in the grocery store. You don't talk, you look down at your phone. You have to start talking to your neighbors. We're the only help we have right now.
Thank you for those remarks. Mindy, I know the question's a little different for you, but what does accountability look like, or what can people in Teresa and Walter's universe kind of look to?
I think that I have always found that accountability is full and fair compensation by the defendants, along with an active plan on their part that the community can hold them accountable to keep, to ensure that this never happens again.
Yeah. We think about accountability all the time in the work that we do, as much as we can inspire it as journalists. And so that roadmap is something that we'd like to see too, and continue to report on as we hope it happens. I want to say thank you to this esteemed panel for making this conversation happen. I want to say thank you to those who joined us this evening for Inside the Margin, and continue to follow our work, subscribe to us on all the socials so we can continue doing work and bringing authors like Teresa and their stories to you. And with that, thank you so much and have a good night.